Whispers of the Ancients, Episode 5, Aksum, Empire of the Red Sea, approximately 100 CE to 960 CE. High in the green highlands of what is now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea, a mighty empire once cast its gaze. Over the sea, it was a land of towering obelisks, ivory trade, and inscriptions carved into stone. In the tongues of empires near and far, ships from Rome and India docked at its harbors. Priests chanted in jeers under cathedral shadows. Coins gleamed with crosses and kings proclaimed their power across 3 continents. This was Aksuman Empire, often overlooked, yet among the most influential of the ancient world. It stood as a bridge between Africa and the broader Mediterranean, and Indian Ocean worlds, a beacon of trade, technology, and early Christianity. Let us walk its terraced fields, climb its stelae, and listen to the whispers of stone and scripture that still echo in the highlands. Segment 1. Land of Origins. Aksum was not born in isolation. Its rise was rooted in ancient traditions that predated its name. Long before the empire, the region was inhabited by peoples of the pre-Aksumite kingdom's cultures centered around Yeha, known for its great temple built in Sabaean style, possibly around the 7th century BCE. Archaeological evidence reveals a blend of local African and South Arabian influences. This early fusion is attributed to trade and migration across the Red Sea, especially with the ancient Sabaean kingdom in present-day Yemen. Yehu's monumental stonework, written inscriptions and ritual structures marked the cultural prelude to Aksum. These foundations would soon give rise to something far greater: a centralized kingdom with ambitions, not just for regional dominance, but for a place in world affairs. Around the 1st century CE, the city of Aksum emerged as the capital of a growing power. It would come to dominate the plateau, the surrounding lowlands, and crucial trade routes that reached the far corners of the known world. Segment 2. At the crossroads of civilizations, Aksum's geography was its greatest asset. Nestled between the resource-rich African interior and the bustling Red Sea coast, the empire commanded the gateway between sub-Saharan Africa and the rest of the ancient world. Adulis, its principal port on the Red Sea, thrived as a center of maritime trade. Ivory, gold, frankincense, rhinoceros horn, tortoise shell, and slaves flowed out of Africa, while goods from the Roman Empire, Persia, India, and even China found their way in. By the 3rd century CE, Roman writers acknowledged Aksum as one of the great powers of the world alongside Rome, Persia, and China. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a Greco-Roman guidebook to maritime commerce, describes Adulis in detail, noting Aksum's strength and the extent of its trade links. But commerce was not merely economic, it was cultural. Aksum's coins bore Greek inscriptions, and its rulers adopted international symbols of kingship, blending them with uniquely African expressions of power. This cosmopolitanism allowed Aksum to grow in stature, influencing both the politics of Arabia and the spiritual future of Africa. Segment 3. Kings of Stone and Gold. By the 4th century CE, Aksum had reached the height of its power. Kings like Ezana expanded the empire's territory into Nubia and across the Red Sea into parts of southern Arabia. Inscriptions from this time boast of conquests, tribute, and the submission of distant peoples. King Ezana stands out not only as a conqueror, but also as a transformational figure. During his reign, Aksum officially embraced Christianity, becoming one of the first empires in the world to do so. Long before Europe's Christian monarchies, the Aksumites were minting coins adorned with the cross and carving prayers into stelae. Ezana's conversion was reportedly inspired by Frumentius, a Syrian Christian captured in his youth who later rose to become the Bishop of Aksum. With his guidance, the empire aligned itself spiritually with Constantinople and the larger Christian world. This shift in faith reshaped Aksumite identity. Churches rose alongside older temples. Crosses replaced crescent moons on coinage. Aksum became a spiritual center, not just a commercial one, but the visual language of its power remained deeply rooted in stone. The towering stelae of Aksum, some over 30 meters high, are among the most extraordinary architectural feats of the ancient world. These obelisks, carved from single pieces of granite, stood as both royal tomb markers and symbols of divine authority. The largest of them, now lying broken, would have dwarfed even Egypt's obelisks, segment 4, scripts, inscriptions, and the voice of the ancestors. Aksum was literate, multilingual, and bureaucratically sophisticated. Its kings issued inscriptions in multiple languages, Ge'ez, Sabaean, and Greek, to ensure they were understood by all who read them, from inland farmers to foreign merchants and envoys. Ge'ez, the sacred liturgical language still used in Ethiopian and Eritrean churches today, was the empire's primary written tongue. On stelae and tablets in stone and metal, the kings recorded their victories, dedications, and piety. Inscriptions found at sites like Matara, Hawalti, and Aksum itself give us a voice from across the centuries. They describe wars and offerings, boast of divine favor, and document alliances with distant rulers. These texts, though often brief, provide invaluable insight into Aksum's political ideology. Kings presented themselves not merely as warriors, but as stewards of faith, justice, and prosperity. Divine approval was central to their legitimacy, whether through the old gods or the Christian deity. In this blend of sacred and state, Aksum stood as a theocratic monarchy, where stone spoke in the name of the king and through him, God. Segment 5, the golden coin and the global stage. Few ancient African kingdoms minted their own coins, but Aksum did, and lavishly so. Beginning in the late 3rd century CE, Aksumite kings struck coins in gold, silver, and bronze, establishing a state-controlled currency system that reflected both their economic power and political ambitions. The coins bore stylized portraits of the monarchs, some with crowns, some with spears, others with halos, a sign of divine favor. On the reverse, inscriptions of piety, such as "by the grace of God," or images of the cross, signaling their Christian faith. They were not merely symbols of wealth. These coins were diplomatic statements, carrying Aksum's image far beyond its borders. Roman merchants, Arabian traders, and Indian sailors all came into contact with these coins, many of which have been unearthed as far as southern India and Sri Lanka. Their design changed with time, from pagan symbols like the crescent and disc to explicitly Christian ones. This numismatic evolution gives us one of the clearest timelines of Aksum's religious transformation. It also affirms that Aksum was no provincial kingdom. It played by the rules of global empire, standardizing currency, cultivating imagery, and broadcasting legitimacy through metal and message. Segment 6, Faith on the Mountain. Christianity in Aksum was not merely a royal edict. Over generations, it wove itself into the daily lives of the people, from peasants to priests. Churches were constructed, some above ground, many carved directly into the rock. Though few survive from the early period, later Ethiopian traditions trace their roots to this era. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, with its distinct liturgy, saints, and sacred language, finds its genesis in Aksumite Christianity. This tradition became one of the oldest continuous expressions of Christianity in the world. Predating most European churches, faith was not passive. Aksumite kings saw themselves as guardians of divine truth, capable of missionary outreach and theological alignment with global Christianity. In later centuries, they corresponded with Christian empires in Byzantium and Egypt. Aksum even intervened militarily in southern Arabia, ostensibly to defend persecuted Christians under Himyarite rule. Around 520 CE, under King Caleb, Aksum invaded Yemen, toppling the Jewish Himyarite king Yusuf Dunuwas, who had allegedly massacred Christian communities. Caleb's campaign, launched across the Red Sea, was not only a rare display of intercontinental warfare from sub-Saharan Africa, but also a declaration of religious responsibility. This was not mere conquest. It was Christian imperialism. Aksum had become a protector of the faith on both sides of the sea. Segment 7, Decline in the shadows. But as swiftly as Aksum had risen, so too did it begin to fade from global prominence. Several forces converged to dim its light. First, environmental changes played a critical role. Deforestation, soil exhaustion from over-farming, and shifts in the monsoon rains affected agricultural productivity on the highland terraces, with the population dependent on these elevated fields. Even small climatic shifts could prove catastrophic. Second, the Islamic expansion of the 7th century redrew the political and commercial map of the Red Sea. Arab Muslim powers came to dominate maritime trade routes, marginalizing Christian Aksum. Adulis, once a jewel of commerce, fell into decline and was eventually abandoned. Though Aksum maintained its Christian identity and inland strength, it became increasingly isolated. The empire's trade revenues dwindled, its currency debased, its monumental architecture ceased. In response, the capital may have shifted from Aksum city to more secure inland highlands. Urban life decreased, power decentralized, yet the memory of empire endured in religious centers, monastic traditions and folk memory. Some historians suggest Aksum's transition was not a collapse but a transformation, one that laid the groundwork for medieval Ethiopian civilization. By the 10th century, Aksum as a political entity had faded, but its legacy, like its obelisks, stood tall. Segment 8, the Queen of the South and the Ark of Memory. Aksum did not vanish into oblivion, it became mythologized. Later Ethiopian chronicles, such as the 14th century Keber Nagast, Glory of the Kings, enshrined Aksum as the link between biblical history and Ethiopian royalty. In these accounts, the Solomonic dynasty traced its descent to the union of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, whom Ethiopian tradition places in Aksumite territory. This national epic claimed that their son, Menelik, brought the Ark of the Covenant from Jerusalem to Aksum. To this day, Ethiopian Orthodox tradition maintains that the Ark rests in the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, in Aksum, guarded and unseen by all but a single appointed monk. True or not, the story became central to Ethiopian identity. It gave spiritual weight to the Christian monarchy and framed Aksum not only as a political center, but a holy city as Second Jerusalem. These legends ensured that Aksum lived on, not merely as stone and soil, but as the sacred heart of a nation. Segment 9, echoes in stone and scripture. Today, Aksum remains a place of pilgrimage. Tourists and faithful alike walk among the stelae fields where some obelisks still stand proudly, while others lie fractured on the earth. Excavations have revealed royal tombs, inscriptions, and church foundations. The largest of these obelisks, Obelisk 1, also known as the Great Stele, once stood at over 33 meters tall. Carved with false doors and windows, it mimicked a multi-story palace in stone. Though it collapsed perhaps during construction, it remains one of the largest single pieces of stone ever attempted by ancient builders. In 1937, Italian occupiers looted another obelisk, stealing it to Rome as a trophy of conquest. After decades of protest, it was finally returned to Ethiopia in 2005, a symbolic homecoming that reminded the world of Aksum's cultural dignity. Yet perhaps the truest testament to Aksum is not in what stands but in what lives on. Geas is still chanted in church liturgies. Crosses still mark the hillsides. Stories of Solomon and Sheba, of Azana and Caleb still echo in Sunday sermons. In these enduring legacies, Aksum speaks not from the pages of history alone, but from the living breath of a people who have never forgotten. Aksum was a bridge between Africa and Arabia, between paganism and Christianity, between isolation and globalization. It reminds us that Africa was not a passive recipient of world history, but a powerful participant. Its ships sailed, its kings commanded, its prophets prayed. In the highlands of Ethiopia, the stones still sing, and in that song we hear a story of empire, faith and endurance etched not in silence, but in granite and gospel. Aksum's golden age, rich in trade, diplomacy, and spiritual radiance, could not last forever. By the 7th century, the world began to change rapidly. A powerful new force was rising in the Arabian Peninsula, Islam. As the Prophet Muhammad's followers spread across the Middle East and North Africa, old trade routes were disrupted or dominated by Islamic polities. Aksum, once the master of the Red Sea corridor, found itself increasingly isolated. Muslim control of key ports like Aden and Jeddah cut off Aksum's easy access to trade in spices, textiles, and other goods from India and beyond. Internally, Soil exhaustion and possible deforestation from centuries of farming and population growth may have begun to take their toll. Once fertile lands became less productive, and with weakening trade, revenues for the empire declined. The elite could no longer sustain the vast projects of earlier times. No more towering stelae were erected. No more golden coins were minted. By the 8th and 9th centuries, Aksumite rulers and populations began to migrate southward into the Ethiopian highlands, abandoning their old capital near modern-day Aksum. The shift to the region around Lalibela and other defensible uplands suggests both environmental pressure and the need to avoid Arab incursions along the coast. But Aksum did not vanish completely. It transformed. Its political structure fractured into smaller kingdoms, many of which preserved the Christian faith and cultural heritage of the Aksumite period. Over time, these would coalesce into the Zagwe and later the Solomonic dynasties of medieval Ethiopia. Though the old empire faded into the mists of history, its legacy endured. Segment 10, Legacy in Stone and Scroll. Despite its decline, the memory of Aksum echoed across time and geography. In stone, the obelisks still stand, towering, ancient, carved with unmatched precision. They speak of an age when the Ethiopians were builders of wonder, and when their engineers rivaled those of Egypt and Rome in faith. The Orthodox Church of Ethiopia kept the spirit of Aksum alive. The Ark of Christianity, brought by Frumentius, continued to shape Ethiopian identity. Even centuries later, Ethiopian emperors would trace their divine right to rule back to the kings of Aksum, and even further to the Queen of Sheba and Solomon himself. Aksum's script, Ge'ez, survived in liturgy and holy texts. It would become the backbone of Ethiopia's literary and theological tradition for generations, and in coinage, the legacy of minting continued to inspire pride. Ethiopian kings in later centuries continued to mint their own currencies, a practice that had its roots in Aksum's era of trade and international prestige. Even in foreign eyes, Aksum never fully disappeared. Arab, Persian, and even Chinese travelers spoke of the Christian Kingdom of the Highlands, a place of mystery, power, and ancient roots. In European maps of the Middle Ages, Prester John, a mythical Christian king of the East, was often imagined to rule from Ethiopia, a distant echo of Aksum's grandeur. Segment 11, Remembering an African Giant Today. Aksum is too often forgotten in the broader narrative of world civilizations, yet it was one of the great empires of antiquity. It connected 3 continents through trade, adopted a world religion before most of Europe, minted its own gold coins, and left behind stone monuments that rival anything in the ancient world. It stood proudly alongside Rome, Persia, and Byzantium, and unlike them, its spiritual tradition still lives on in an unbroken line. Modern Ethiopia owes much to Aksum, not just in religion, but in language, identity, and pride. The Ethiopian flag, with its green, yellow, and red, draws symbolic lineage from the Aksumite era, and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, with its chants and incense, its sacred texts in Ge'ez, and its faith in the Ark of the Covenant, is a living museum of Aksum's spiritual legacy. To walk among the stelae fields of Aksum today is to walk through the bones of an empire, and to hear the whispers of a people who once ruled the Red Sea. Aksum was not the periphery of civilization. It was the beating heart of Africa's engagement with the wider world, and though its age has passed, its spirit endures in stone, in scripture, and in the soul of a nation. Segment 11.1. Aksum in the world context. When we consider ancient civilizations, the names that most often come to mind are Rome, Egypt, Greece, China, and perhaps Persia or Mesopotamia. But Aksum deserves a seat among them, not as a peripheral footnote, but as a central actor in the great drama of antiquity. While the Roman Empire reached its zenith under emperors like Trajan and Hadrian, Aksum was minting gold coins bearing the cross, while Chinese dynasties built the Great Wall and sent emissaries across the Silk Road. Aksumite ships were docking in Indian harbors and trading with the kingdoms of South Asia. While the Byzantine Empire solidified Christianity as a state religion, Aksum had already done so, helping to define what it meant to be a Christian kingdom outside of Rome. Aksum's importance was recognized even by those far away. In his work Christian Topography, the 6th century traveler Cosmas Indicopleustes describes Aksum as one of the great kingdoms of the world, ranked alongside Persia and Byzantium. For the ancient mind, Aksum was not a forgotten corner of the globe. It was an empire of stature and renown. In modern terms, Aksum was a globalized power. It engaged in long-distance trade, boasted a cosmopolitan capital, absorbed and reinterpreted outside ideas and exported its own culture in turn. It was both African and international, rooted in its highland soil. Yet looking outward across the sea, Segment 12, the Aksumite people, life beyond the monuments, behind the grand stelae. Royal inscriptions and gilded coins stood the people of Aksum, farmers, priests, merchants, builders, and scribes. Agriculture formed the backbone of the Aksumite economy. Highland farmers cultivated wheat, barley, and teff, a native grain that remains a staple of Ethiopian cuisine. In the lowlands, people tended livestock, cattle, goats, and sheep, and grew fruits like figs and grapes. The city of Aksum itself was a melting pot. Archaeological digs reveal homes of varying size, suggesting a stratified society. Large stone mansions with multiple rooms and courtyards stood beside more modest dwellings, indicating both elite families and ordinary citizens lived within the capital's bounds. Pottery and tools reflect a people both practical and artistic. Decorative motifs hinted influences from the Middle East and India, while still retaining local traditions. Inscriptions in Ge'ez speak of a literate culture with religious and administrative sophistication. Religion permeated daily life even before the adoption of Christianity. Temples dedicated to deities like Morim and Asta were central to urban and rural life. After conversion, churches replaced temples, and the rhythm of the calendar became tied to Christian feasts, fasts, and holy days. Though much of their lives are lost to time, the people of Aksum left behind the outline of a complex, organized, and deeply spiritual society. Segment 13. Archaeology and rediscovery. The rediscovery of Aksum in the modern era has been slow but profound. For centuries, the city's ruins lay half forgotten, swallowed by time, war, and legend. Local traditions kept the memory alive, and Ethiopian chroniclers preserved fragments of the past. But it was only in the 19th and 20th centuries that archaeologists began to unearth the story. Once more, excavations in and around Aksum have revealed royal tombs carved deep into bedrock, stone inscriptions written in Ge'ez, Greek, and South Arabian, and residential compounds with intricate water systems. One of the most famous finds is the tomb of King Caleb, a 6th century monarch who famously led an invasion of Yemen to defend persecuted Christians there. A remarkable example of early humanitarian intervention by an African power. Artifacts recovered include pottery, jewelry, religious icons, and imported items from India and the Mediterranean. Each discovery adds depth to our understanding of Aksum's reach and sophistication. Controversies have also risen, most notably around the obelisk of Aksum in 1937. During Italy's occupation of Ethiopia under Mussolini, one of the tallest stelae was looted and transported to Rome. It remained there for nearly 70 years before being returned and re-erected in Aksum in 2005, a symbolic act of restitution that reignited interest in the empire's legacy. Even today, new discoveries continue to emerge, promising that the story of Aksum is far from finished. Segment 14. A final reflection. Aksum is a civilization that challenges the narratives we often tell about Africa. Too often, African history is portrayed as beginning with colonialism or reduced to tribal fragments. But the truth is far richer. Aksum was a literate, organized, international empire long before much of Europe had emerged from tribal kingdoms. It was African in origin, yet global in ambition. It held a distinct spiritual identity, yet welcomed foreign traders and influences. It was not just a bridge between Africa and the world, it was a pillar. To tell the story of Aksum is to reclaim a heritage often denied, the heritage of African excellence, of technological innovation, of deep spirituality, and of global connection. It reminds us that greatness is not the sole domain of Europe or Asia, but that it has always existed on African soil. The stelae still stand, the faith still breathes, and the memory, like the empire, endures.